Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is David Goodman. I'm the director of the China Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. I'm currently in Suzhou, which is why I was a bit hesitant there. Anyhow, before we start, can we acknowledge the original owners of the land on which the University of Sydney is based, and indeed the original land on which most of you may well be watching this webinar. Today we are very fortunate to have a presentation from a team that's working on perceptions of interregional economic inequality in China. It's led by Xian Huang of Rutgers University, and she's aided by Wook Li from Adelphi and Cai Zuo from Fudan University. What we're going to do today is we're going to let Xian, who's an accomplished scholar of social change, in particular of redistribution and inequality in China. We're going to let her speak first. And then after she's presented the research project as it's going at the moment, then she and Dongwook Li will respond to questions. Before we start and I hand over, will you, when you're asking questions, can you please put them in the Q&A facility at the bottom of the Zoom page, and we'll take it from there. Questions or comments? Okay, over to you, Dr. Huang. Professor Huang.
Good morning, everyone, or hello, depending on where you're joining from. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Goodman for inviting me to speak today and for the warm introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here virtually and to have the opportunity to present, share my recent research about economic inequality in China. The study I'm gonna present today is a collaborative project with Professor Dongwu Li from Adelphi University and also Professor Cai Zuo from Fudan University. I'm very excited to present our research here. We all know that economic inequality is a very important, significant issue in China. One of the most common ways scholars measure income inequality is through Gini coefficient, ranging from 0 to 1, reflecting how unevenly income is distributed across a population. The World Bank calculates the Gini coefficient using adjusted household income after taxes and transfers, or household consumption per capita. And according to their data, China's Gini coefficient rose from around 0.3 in 1980 to a peak of 0.44 in 2010, before declining to 0.37 by 2020. Although there has been a gradual decline since 2010, China's Gini coefficient remains relatively high compared to many other countries, as this table shows. In fact, some economists, they use individual level survey data, and their study shows that China's Gini coefficient has hovered around 0.47 since 2013. So which is higher than the World Bank data indicates here. In particular, regional economic disparity is one of the key drivers of China's economic inequality. So in our study, we focus on this type of economic inequality in China. We define interregional economic inequality as uneven economic development among some national regions. In our study, we measure this using the variation in GDP per capita across cities within each province. According to our measure, the median level of interregional inequality remains relatively stable between 2002 and 2015. However, the variance across province in this measure has declined by 14% during the same period. This suggests that interregional inequality has become a more widespread issue, affecting a broader range of provinces rather than being concentrated in just a few. In the figure here, you can see that the horizontal dotted lines representing the change in intercity economic inequality from 2002 to 2015 for each province. Not every province experienced an increase in this inequality. Some saw little change and others even saw a decline. To further illustrate this pattern, we present maps showing the intercity variation, the regional variation in intercity economic inequality for 2002 at the top and for 2015 at the bottom. This map reveals changes over time. Specifically, the intercity economic inequality increased in several central provinces, such as Hunan, Anhui, Hubei. In contrast, it has declined in parts of the southwest, such as Sichuan, Yunnan, Guizhou, as well as in the northeast, such as Heilongjiang and Jilin. So there is a regional variation in the change of intercity economic inequality over time. In this context, we want to examine how intercity economic inequality shape people's perception of distributive fairness, alongside two other key factors, the economic productivity of the city and individual social classes. Much of the literature on political coalition, support for government redistribution, assume that people naturally view economic inequality as unfair, and they act politically to correct it. But instead of taking fairness perception as given, we want to take a step back and ask, how are these perceptions formed in the first place? So based on the literature, we examine distributed conflicts along two dimensions. One is class, such as higher income groups versus lower income groups. And the other dimension is place, such as poor city versus rich city. These two dimensions are often seen as the main drivers of people's preferences for redistribution. In addition, we propose a third dimension, the distribution of economic productivity across regions, and we will use intercity economic inequality to capture this dimension. In this study, we address the question, what's the attitudinal impact of interregional economic inequality on people's perception, especially when compared to the effect of social class and place of residence. We also explore the political implication of our finding. Specifically, we examine how people's perception of distributive fairness will influence their preferences for government redistribution. Using data from repeated public opinion survey in China, we find empirical evidence that support our theoretical predictions about the effect of social class, place of residence, and interregional economic inequality on people's perception of fairness. Specifically, we find that social class has a stronger influence on perceived fairness than place of residence. This is a pattern that contrasts with finding from many Western countries where regional interest or regional identity often plays a larger role than class. Moreover, we find that interregional economic inequality also significantly shape how people perceive fairness. Interestingly, we find its impact actually vary with broader economic context. Specifically, during economic upturns, higher interregional inequality tend to enhance people's perception of fairness. But during economic downturn, it tends to undermine people's perception of fairness. That's the finding of our study. We think that our study might make two contributions to the literature on economic inequality and distributive fairness. We are one of the first to identify the attitudinal effect of interregional economic inequality in China and to assess its importance relative to social class and place of residence in shaping people's perception of distributive fairness. As I mentioned before, the study is based on data from Western countries as the United States, United Kingdom, Spain, Germany. They often find that regional identity outweighs class in shaping redistributive preferences. In those countries, individuals in poor regions, they tend to demand more redistribution regardless their personal income. However, our findings show that in China, social class is a stronger predictor than region when it comes to people's perception of distributive fairness. This divergence suggests that some theoretical framework developed based on the experience of Western advanced economies may not fully apply to other contexts. Our results highlight the importance of considering local economic, social, political conditions when studying people's attitudes towards inequality and redistribution. The second contribution of our study is to offer new insights into the evolving nature of meritocracy in China. In sociology, the belief that economic outcomes are determined by individuals' ability and their efforts rather than the structural factors like class, family, race is known as meritocratic values, belief, or simply meritocracy. For many years, empirical research has shown that Chinese society has maintained a relatively high tolerance for economic inequality, often viewing inequality as a natural byproduct of rapid economic development. Many people believe that inequality is acceptable as long as it's seen as the result of hard work and talent. However, recent evidence suggests a shift in this belief among Chinese. Our study contributes to this emerging argument by showing how perception of fairness have changed in response to rising interregional economic inequality in China. This shift may signal a broader transformation in how meritocracy is understood and accepted in contemporary China. Before I elaborate on our hypothesis, our theoretical predictions, let me introduce you to the literature or to the theory about distributive fairness. Distributive fairness refers to the allocation of resources in a way that aligns with widely accepted moral or normative principles, such as equality and needs. An income distribution is considered fair when it follows rule or standard that people recognize as just, as fair. There are two key principles that individuals often use to judge whether income resource is distributed fairly. One is the principle of merit. This principle holds that people should be rewarded based on their contributions to the society. In other words, income should be distributed to each according to their desert. Those who work harder contribute more to the society. They are seen as deserving more. This is the principle of merit. And the other principle is based on needs. This principle emphasizes that everyone has a basic right to a decent living, a decent standard of living, regardless their contribution. It supports the idea of distributing income to each according to their needs, ensuring that those who are less well off receive more support. In this framework, we develop our first hypothesis, which is about social class and people's perception of distributive fairness. Previous research shows that individuals with higher income are more likely to favor income distribution based on merit, rewarding effort, skills, and contribution. In contrast, those with lower income, they tend to support distribution based on needs, emphasizing for the less advantaged. This difference stems from the unequal distribution of assets, such as property, marketable skills, which provide better life chances for individuals in the form of higher income and social rewards. People who possess these advantages often justify their position by pointing to their contribution to society, reinforcing a merit-based view of fairness. In line with this reasoning, we predict that individuals from higher social classes, those with higher income or higher social status, they are more likely to perceive the current income distribution as fair. Similarly, individuals living in affluent regions may view the current income distribution as a reflection of meritocratic value, leading to a great acceptance of the status quo. In contrast, those living in less developed or poor regions, they might interpret higher inequality as a result of structural disadvantages, such as limited access to opportunity or resources. So we propose our second hypothesis, which is individuals living in rich regions, they are more likely to perceive income distribution as fair, while those living in poor regions, they are more likely to perceive it as unfair. Our last hypothesis is regarding the effect of inequality. To understand the relationship between economic inequality and people's perception of fairness, we draw on two competing theoretical perspectives. One is the reaction hypothesis. It suggests that when inequality exists, what people consider acceptable, they will push back. So rising inequality leads to greater social discontent and conflict, as different people, such as different classes, people in different regions, they develop divergent preferences for redistribution. In contrast, the adjustment theory or the adjustment hypothesis offer a very different prediction. It argues that people tend to adapt to the level of inequality they experience. As inequality increases, individuals might adjust their expectation of what is fair, gradually coming to accept the higher level of inequality as normal. According to this view, public demand for equality may actually decline in a highly unequal society, but not because people approve for inequality, but because people get used to it. So both the reaction and the adjustment hypothesis, they assume that people view economic inequality as inherently unfair, no matter they try to correct it or they try to adjust to it. However, as I mentioned before, perception of fairness is not fixed. They are shaped by underlying distributive belief, such as whether people value merit or needs in location. It is those beliefs about what constitutes a fair income distribution, how much inequality is acceptable, and why some people are better off than others, that fundamentally shape how individuals respond to economic inequality, whether they will react to it or they will adjust to it. For example, the meritocratic belief that earn their success by hard work, talent, while losers are responsible for their own outcome, can lead people to view inequality as justified. In the Chinese context, sociological research has documented a relatively high tolerance for inequality, especially in the early stage of market reform in China. In the 1990s and even in early 2000s, many Chinese view growing income gaps as a legitimate outcome of market forces. Inequality symbolized opportunity, reward for effort, and a break from Mao Zedong's egalitarianism. This sentiment was famously captured by Deng Xiaoping's quote, "Let some people get rich first." However, as China's economic growth has slowed down in the recent decades, and as opportunity for upward mobility have narrowed, the belief that success is purely based on merit has begun to erode in the Chinese society. Therefore, we expect that the perception of fairness under interregional economic inequality vary with the stage of economic development. Specifically, in economic upturn, when growth is strong and incomes are rising, the hypotheses tend to dominate. People are more likely to accept inequality, and the relationship between inequality and fairness perception may be weak or even positive. Higher inequality, higher perceived fairness. However, in economic downturn, when growth down and income stagnated or even decline, the reaction hypothesis is turned on and become more relevant. People are more likely to challenge inequality, and the relationship between inequality and perceived fairness becomes strong and negative. High inequality, lower fairness perception. To test our hypothesis, we use data from 2 waves of barometer survey, but we only use the mainland China sample, so we call it Chinese Barometer Survey, CBS. We only use the data from wave 1 collected in 2002 and wave 4 in 2015 to construct our individual level variance. At the regional level, we use prefectural level GDP per capita as a process for economic productivity of city, and to measure and use the GDP per capita to measure inter-city economic inequality. And the GDP population data come from the China State Statistical Yearbooks. Our dependent variable is fairness perception. It is a subjective measure of whether the respondents see the current income distribution as fair or not. And we have 3 key independent variables. The first one is social class, measured by respondents' self-rated position in social class. The second and the third independent variables are city-level GDP per capita and inter-city inequality. We also construct a cross-level interaction variable to capture the interactive effect of regional attributes and individual social economic status. Our model also controls for individuals' demographic, social economic variable, such as gender, their household registration or 户口, and some subjective factors such as their belief in meritocracy and their subjective financial prospects. To examine how perception of fairness are shaped by factors at different levels, we employ a multi-level modeling approach with cross-level interaction. So our model has 2 levels. Level 1 represents the individual level, where we analyze personal characteristics such as income, education, social class, and this is the fixed effect part of our model. Level 2 captures the regional level, incorporating group-level variables such as regional economic productivity and inter-city inequality. And this is the random effect part of our model to account for the variation across regions. And as I said, we also estimate the cross-level interaction. specifically how the effect of individual social class vary depending on the regional economic attributes. This interaction allows us to explore how personal and contextual factors jointly shape attitudes towards inequality. Here you can see the plot of the regression coefficient. The statistical significant results are highlighted in color. Those figures indicate that individuals from lower social class, they are more likely than those from the middle class to perceive the current income inequality as unfair. However, we find no evidence that this sense of unfairness is shared to the same extent by individuals coming from the upper class. In addition, as you can see from the coefficient for financial prospects are significantly associated with fairness perception. Individuals with more optimistic financial outlooks, they are more likely to perceive the income distribution as fair. And also, the meritocratic belief, the idea that success is earned through ability and effort, is positively and significantly associated with fairness perception in 2002, but not in 2015. This suggests that the influence of merit-based thinking of fairness judgment, fairness, has declined or even disappeared over time in China. This figure displays the marginal effect of social class conditioning on city-level GDP per capita. The results reveal a pronounced class divide in fairness perception, regardless the economic prosperity of the city in which individuals live. So the red color refers to the marginal effect of social class for the upper class perception of fairness. And you can see in both 2002 and 2015, the red line is above the blue line, indicating that the upper class have higher fairness perceived than the lower class. And this class difference is quite persistent over time. So our first hypothesis is supported. Regarding the second hypothesis about the place effect, we also find that people in wealthier, in richer cities, they perceive greater fairness than their counterpart in poor city. So as you can see, the line, the two lines in 2015, the plot on the right-hand side, they increase with the city level GDP per capita, which means that people in richer city, they feel higher fairness than the counterparts in poor city. However, this pattern is not there in 2002, which means that the place effect is supported only in 2015 data, but not in 2002. This doesn't mean that the regional economic is irrelevant. On the contrary, the city or the region, they matters, but the class effect appears more stable and consistent time. Next, we revisit the marginal effect of class, but at this time, the interaction term focuses on intercity economic inequality. Again, we can see that the rich group, the upper class, and the poor, the lower class, they are divided in fairness perception. And this seems to be happening independent of the places where economic inequality is high or low. So the red line is above the blue line in both years. This figure on the left-hand side indicates that both classes, they feel fairer when intercity inequality increased in 2002. But this trend is reversed in 2015. So on the figure in the figure on the right-hand side, you can see the marginal effect slope for social class declines with intercity inequality, while the slope increased with intercity inequality in 2002. Record that the coefficient of meritocracy is not statistically significant when we use 2015 data. So the shift in meritocracy may explain the contrast of fairness perception between 2002 and 2015. We connect the above analysis by incorporating two regional attributes at the same time into the multi-level model, recognizing that the fairness judgment based on class interests are also subject to the two structural conditions, the economic productivity of the city and the distribution of the productivity within a province across city. This figure shows the marginal effect of social class on fairness perception for lower and upper class in 2002. So you can see there are 4 lines on the left-hand side that refers to lower class, and the other 4 on the right-hand side that refers to upper class. And within each class, we have 4 subgroups. People living in poor city with low inequality, that is PL, what PL means. And RL refers to people living in rich city with low inequality. And PH refers to people living poor city with high inequality. And RH refers to people living rich city with high inequality. So I guess the first main finding from this figure is that the class difference was very persistent, okay? So all the 4 subgroups within the lower class, they are lower fairness perception than the counterparts in the upper class. And this pattern is persistent across 2002 and 2015. So the class effect, again, is supported. In 2015, the place effect stand out. Okay, so this can be seen by comparing the lines for PL with RL, or comparing the line for PH with RH. Okay, so that means controlling with the same inequality level, people living poor city versus people living rich city. And we see that in both years, okay, and we see that among both upper and lower classes, people in rich city, they feel more fairness than those in poor city. So the RL is higher than PL, the RH is higher than PH in both classes. So this is the place effect, but we do not see this effect consistently in 2002. The place effect is only supported by the 2015 data. As for the inequality effect, we find evidence for it in both years, but with different patterns. Okay, so for the inequality effect, we want to compare the line for PL with PH and comparing the line of RL with RH. As you can see from this figure, people, no matter upper class or lower class, they are averse to intercity inequality in 2015. Okay, so the RL line is always higher than the PL, than the RH line, and the PL is higher than the PH line, which means that people living in city with low inequality, they have better fairness perception than their counterparts in the city with high inequality. In summary, we examine how and to what extent interregional economic inequality interact with social class and place to shape perception of fairness in China. And using multi-level modeling and data from the Chinese Barometer Survey in 2002 and 2015, we uncovered several key findings. First, the class difference in fairness perception is persistent over time. Across all model specification, individuals in the upper class, they consistently report higher perception of fairness than those in lower class. And the place effect is less consistent in contrast. The prediction that people in richer cities perceive greater fairness is supported only in 2015. And as for the inequality effects, as predicted, regional inequality is associated with lower fairness perception in 2015. In contrast, in 2002, during economic upturn, upper class individuals actually perceive greater fairness when inequality increased. This finding reflects a broader decline in meritocratic belief over time in China and suggests that the public tolerance for inequality is increasingly shaped by economic context and shifting social values. Our study suggests that over time, we observe a growing intolerance towards interregional inequality in China. And this finding carries some political implications. This shift in attitude and value present important challenges to policymakers, especially in the context of slowing economic growth and rapid population aging. One potential consequence is that when people come to view the income inequality as the income distribution as unfair, they might become likely to hold the government accountable and demand more redistribution. So as an extension of this paper, we explicitly test this argument that when people perceive the current income distribution as unfair, they are likely to support government redistribution. So we constructed a composite index capturing the extent to which individuals attribute responsibility to the government rather than to themselves or to individuals for addressing key social issues. And this index serves as a proxy for public preferences for government redistribution. So again, we used data in 2002 and 2015 to test our hypothesis. The independent variable is people's perception of fairness. So this is the plot of the coefficient. And as we can see that there is a negative relationship between perception of fairness and people's attribution of social welfare responsibility to the government. And this negative relationship is found in both 2002 and 2015. This finding suggests that when individuals perceive income distribution as unfair, they are more inclined to hold the government accountable for addressing inequality through social policy, such as housing, education, healthcare, and elderly care. Overall, this highlights how public perception of distributive unfairness can influence the government's legitimacy in China. Looking ahead, we plan to incorporate interpersonal income inequality into this study to examine how it interacts with perceived fairness in shaping people's preferences for government redistribution. Given the relatively strong tolerance of inequality in Chinese society, it is possible that some people might favor fair inequality over unfair equality. We aim this hypothesis using individual level data collected across different time periods and regions in China. So this will be the first avenue for future research. Additionally, we will continue our research on interregional economic inequality in China. We are particularly focused on developing theoretical framework and exploring the mechanism through which interregional inequality influence people's perception of fairness and their support for government redistribution. One potential is that certain regional economic attributes, such as level of economic development, might determine individuals' economic opportunity, while other regional attributes, such as intercity economic disparity, might affect the economic risk individuals face. So these two regional characteristics jointly influence how individuals become the balance between economic opportunity and security, which might in turn shape their preferences for government redistribution. Intend to explore this mechanism empirically in future research. Finally, we will expand our research using more recent data to examine how interregional economic inequality in China has evolved since 2015. So all the findings we presented so far stopped in 2015. So you might wonder, has the intercity inequality remained stable, increase, or decrease after 2015? Here is a snapshot of intercity economic inequality trends from 2015 to 2019, just before the start of the pandemic. During this period, the regional variance in intercity inequality narrowed significantly compared to the years between 2002 and 2015. So as you can see, the median level of intercity inequality is the same for both years, but the variance has decreased. This suggests that intercity inequality has become a more widespread issue across regions in China. Between 2015 and 2019, only several provinces, such as Sichuan, Guizhou, Anhui, Jiangxi, Jiangsu, Heilongjiang, Hubei, and Guangdong, show in reducing intercity disparity. In contrast, most provinces either saw no meaningful change or experienced worsening inequality, as seen in places like Jilin and Beijing. They had worse intercity inequality in 2019. Given that nearly half of Chinese provinces show minimum change in intercity inequality over time, one might infer that the state's policy aimed at reducing regional economic disparity were less effective, at least by 2019. This underscores the need for continual research and policy innovation in this area. With that, I will end my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to having your questions and discussion. Thank you.